Welcome to our video on podcasting for teachers. This was created by Sarah Lassiter
and Garrett Peterson.
So in this video today, we're going to talk about how you can use podcasts as an educational tool. We're going to share some resources with you for making your first teacher podcast and also give you some sample ideas. Podcasts are a really interesting growing medium. There's about 67 million Americans who listen to podcasts monthly, so why not use it as a resource for our students? There's a lot of ways you can create podcasts for your students and a lot of things you can do to have them use them. They can be used as a guide for some sort of learning activity. They can be a supplement to a lecture or a video that you've already created. They can be used as a review tool, which I use a lot. You can make them as an augmented lesson, so listening to an activity while they're asked to do something else. Or it can be something like required listening, an alternate lecture, for example. I recommend that students use podcasts really as a supplement, so they shouldn't be doing anything else while they're podcasting. Or while they're listening to podcasts. They shouldn't be on their laptops or doing other homework, but they can use it while they're out and about, in the car, maybe doing chores, and really using it as gained study time when they wouldn't necessarily be looking at a screen. They can take their podcast with them.
One of the things that I was introduced to last summer was PBL, and maybe not the same PBL that you're used to, but podcast-based learning. And there are a few questions that you want to consider. First of all, who is the audience? You could consider the audience to be your students, or you could even have the audience to be other teachers. Podcast-based learning is essentially helpful in especially language classes, just to give those students that additional time to hear the language being spoken. There have been studies that show that podcast-based learning does actually increase language acquisition. So that's a good use of podcast-based learning. It just also, as Sarah was mentioning, offers an interesting lesson that you can deliver and gives this to students in a different way. One of the things that I was a little bit intimidated about is the technology aspect of it, but fortunately it's pretty low tech. You can record directly from your computer or even from your phone, which is what I did using the Anchor.fm app. Some advice: make sure you use a quiet place so there's not a lot of exterior noise coming in. And one place that's really helpful is a closed closet.
So we're going to go ahead and show you a few samples of what podcasts that we've made for our students. Mine was used predominantly as a review tool for my AP Biology students. So we're going to go ahead and take a quick look at that. This is Mrs. Lassiter's list of AP Biology tips. Welcome. Thanks for tuning in. If you're listening, you're probably one of my AP Biology students, or you're just interested in learning more about the AP Biology exam. For some of the main topics in Big Idea 3, mention how they've shown up on past FRQs, and talk about some strategies for answering questions related to Big Idea 3 on the AP Biology exam.
All right, so one of the podcasts that I'm trying to start designing is meant just to introduce quick little 5-minute lessons on different statisticians and some of the cool things that they've contributed.
That has asked, where do we use math in the real world? It is a fun, quick read that will give you the tools to talk math to anyone in plain language. Abraham Wald was born in Kalovzar, Hungary, on Halloween 1902, which is now Cluj, Romania. He was homeschooled by his parents, who themselves were intellectuals.
All right, if you want to step your podcast game up a little bit, you can invest in some tools that might help you get better audio quality. A USB microphone is very helpful if you have access to a recording studio, maybe at your school, like we do at RTHS. It might be nice to step in there for a little bit quiet area. A pop filter is good to use on microphones, so you can get rid of those annoying like S's and T's sounds that kind of make audio quality a little bit lower. And some extra things that you might want to consider: sound effects, intro music. There's a lot of free music resources out there, so you can use those to get your intro and extra music. You can even ask students to create the music for your podcasts for you, and then you can get down to actually editing your podcasts if you want to make them a little bit crisper.
And there are a number of different platforms that you can use. SoundCloud, or the one that I used at Anchor.fm. There are some that are free, but most are not free. So if you're willing to make a really good podcast, you may have to invest a little bit, but it's usually not anything too crazy. The nice thing that I like about Anchor.fm is that there's no limit. It's free. It's an easy way to distribute to many different platforms like iTunes, Google Play, etc. And you can actually record through the website itself, and I just did this on my phone. So it was really easy, didn't even have to use a computer at first.
If you're into editing your podcast, this again is optional, but it is useful for listener retention, and you can do that through something like Audacity, which is available for Windows or Mac, and these are free, and you can edit and record all in one place, or you can record through GarageBand if you're familiar with that tool. Just make sure you export the file as MP3 or WAV so that you can upload it to the right source later. So this is just a screenshot of me editing a podcast in Audacity. It's pretty user-friendly, but if you're not ready for that learning curve or getting used to an editing software, you can just record straight to your phone. So let's talk about publishing. Make sure you get that MP3 or WAV file, and once it's ready to go, if you're not recording directly to a site like Garrett did, you can use one of the platforms we mentioned already to host your podcast. So I initially hosted mine on SoundCloud, but if you don't get a pro account, it does cut you off at about a 3-hour recording limit, so keep that in mind. But other sites like Anchor, which we recommend, have no upload limits and they are free. You want to think about some cover art. When you access a podcast, a lot of people will access it on their phone through iTunes, and they want to see some attractive cover art, and there are some limits to that, so make sure that you use our tips, which we'll link in this video, to get the correct cover art for your podcast. And think of a catchy title or an easy to find title for your podcast and what you might want to put in your episode description. And then you can upload your podcast. Make sure you advertise it to your students, however they're going to access it. Make sure the links are available, and you can spread it out to other people as well. Like we spread out our YouTube videos. It's easy for other students in other schools to find our flipped videos, and you should make that the same for your podcast as well. You can also check out your analytics and see who is listening to your podcast, for how long, how many people, and when. And of course, advertising it on things like your school website, your learning management system, and Twitter, or other flipped content. If you have flipped videos already, maybe link your podcast on there. This is just a quick view of my podcast uploaded through iTunes. It was very easy to get there once it was already in SoundCloud. And it looks like any other podcast, and you can find it in the iTunes store, which is helpful for other people who might be searching for other biology podcasts. Podcast analytics through iTunes are actually very user-friendly. By the end of the AP exam, I could see that my podcast was downloaded on 108 devices, which is cool because I only had 14 students this year, so that means the reach is much larger than just RTHS. Again, I can see sort of my top episodes. This is through SoundCloud and the different number of plays I got per episode, which is useful too, and I can see which episodes had the most retention or who was listening where and when.
Now, my podcast is not quite as developed as Sarah's is just quite yet. Have the first one, the little tease that you got there, was talking about a statistician named Abraham Wald. Then this story came from a book that I read, How Not to Be Wrong. And it talks about, the title of this is Where the Bullet Holes Aren't. So maybe that might be a catchy title. And this just talks about a survivor of the Holocaust who was using his talents, using statistics during World War II to protect planes and trying to determine where the armor should be placed on the planes. And another one that I'm going to be working on is actually about the T distribution, which is something that my statistics students use almost every single day, on how he actually created this distribution to brew beer. But actually had to call it the student's T-test because of a company rule where he couldn't take any credit.
So just some quick best practices and then we'll wrap this up. Think about what topics are good for audio. Now, a lot of biology concepts are better illustrated with images or models, so I had to think about which stuff would have been best conveyed through audio, and then think about audio components that might be distracting. So some static can be removed with editing tools, but not entirely if you want to include sound effects to make it more interesting, and just be aware of any music you use to not be using music that you shouldn't be using. Make sure there's no other licenses or copyrights on the music. So that's why you should use like the free music archive that's out there.
Yeah, so we have a link here on teaching students how to listen to podcasts. One thing that you want to do is you really want to make it accessible to students. And just kind of like you've been experienced in flipping, this isn't so different. There's just not a video that you're making. It's just only that audio. So you don't have those visual cues. So you have to get kind of creative with your writing. We have a full outline linked here that you can see, and hopefully you will find this very helpful in creating your own podcasts.
All right, good luck and happy podcasting.